As 1963 begins, John F. Kennedy is in the White House. The Green Bay Packers have just defeated the New York Giants in the NFL championship game, not yet referred to as the Super Bowl. Telstar by the Tornadoes was the #1 song on the radio. Average American household income, $5,807. Gas was 29 cents a gallon. And if you wanted to buy a ticket to see a living legend at Madison Square Garden, it would set you back $5. That's a ringside ticket, by the way. Bruno Sammartino was here to take us through from 1963 through 1969. The only person I can think of that would be able to do that. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure, Sean.
Discuss how Capitol fit into the NWA. Was it really just another one of the many territories under the NWA umbrella?
Well, I never thought that they were exactly quite like that. They were more independent, but they cooperated more or less with the NWA. But they really didn't use the NWA like other territories did as far as their champion, for example. They had their own stars. Rocca, if you remember, Argentino Rocca or Antonino Rocca. He was a big card, you know, in New York in the 50s, especially the late 40s and, you know, the 50s and that. And occasionally, like for example, they brought in Luthez to wrestle Rocca in New York. And Luthez, of course, was the NWA champion. But unfortunately, the gate was terrible. One of the worst gates ever in the garden. And so Toots Mondt, especially at that time, he was younger than when I came around. He felt that no, we have our stars and we do well with them. We're not going to be that close knit to the NWA.
What was the relationship with Vince Toots and at the time Doc Sarpolis, the NWA president?
I don't know that the relationship, how good or bad it was, I don't know, because you're speaking of early on in my career. But I know that they had a good relationship with Sam Mushnick, who was the promoter in St. Louis, but he was also, president. You know, with the NWA. At that time, I know that they had a good relationship.
Some of the other names we hear, fill us in and get us up to speed. Willie Gilzenberg.
Willie Gilzenberg was you know, he was involved in boxing. And he got involved in wrestling, and he got in with Vince and Toots. He promoted some towns in New Jersey, especially. Him and a guy they called Babe McCullen, they were partners. And then he got closer, more you know, tied in with Vince McMahon and Toots Mondt, and then they made him the president, as a matter of fact. But the reality is that it was Vince and Toots who were really the bosses, the promoters. And but Willie was playing an important role as the president with publicity and all that kind of stuff. And he also kept promoting certain towns in, you know, in Jersey and what have you.
You had Zacco in Philadelphia.
Well, that was Ray Fabiani in Philadelphia. But Phil Zacco did some of the Jersey towns and that. But more than that, Phil was a great guy. But Phil did all the book work for the IRS and all that kind of stuff.
The accounting?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He did a lot. Now, they brought in a CPA, whoever it was then, when they had actually filed with Uncle Sam. But Phil Zacco was the guy who was keeping all the records and everything. He was very important to the company.
Talk to me about that dispute and the ramifications that came from that.
Well, again, now you're talking about a time when I'm still in Canada, in Toronto.
Right.
So I didn't understand. I was young. I didn't understand all the politics that went on in that. The match was made with Rogers and Thez because they wanted Thez to regain the title. And at this time, they weren't very pleased. What a lot of people don't know, you know, first of all, let me say this. Buddy Rogers and I were enemies from day one. He didn't like me, I didn't like him, okay?
Why?
I felt when I first met him, I had heard, for one thing, I had heard a lot of stories about him. the different guys that he hurt intentionally and stuff like this. But also that I had heard stories about him being a con man and about manipulator and all this kind of stuff. I didn't know the man, but when I first met him, I don't know if I was influenced by all these stories, but somehow I thought I saw that in this guy. Okay. I just saw it in him, and I guess, to be honest and true to yourself, I guess maybe I showed it. And he saw me as this young guy coming into the business and had done some good things like picking up Ace Calhoun, okay, before he came in. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of noise about this guy. He says, what a powerful guy, you know, from Abruzzi, Italy. They start calling me the strong man from Abruzzi and all this kind of stuff. But Buddy, when he came into the territory, he always brought his entourage of wrestlers. Buddy Austin, Johnny Barron, the Gabor brothers, Clyde Steves, a bunch of them. And what he always wanted to do was, Billy Darnell, who was a great, great super talent. A lot of them were great talents.
Right.
But he wanted to manipulate the territories and make these guys the stars. You know what I mean?
Right.
And anybody else who was already in that territory, they would have to be stepping stones for these other guys.
Why were they so invested in Buddy? But Toots and Vincent J, they secede from the NWA as a result of this, just to keep the spotlight on Buddy and refer to him as the world champion still. They were hypnotized.
Toots Mont wasn't as much. Vince, first of all, Rogers, you have to understand, was a great talent.
Right.
He was great in the ring. I mean, there's guys that have followed him. And we could argue where you could say to me, well, this guy I think was every bit as good or better. But the reality is Rogers had something about him that when he went in that ring, he stood out. You know what I mean? He wasn't imitating anybody.
He was genuine arrogance.
He was a genuine guy. Well, he was arrogant. And in that ring, he portrayed it in such a way that it came really across. But there was something about him that for one thing, the guy kept himself in good shape. Buddy always looked fit. He wasn't a steroid freak. Right. He was a guy who worked out, and he had a genuine, good-looking body. He was a great performer in the ring. You can't take it away from him. And he was, you know, like I say, he had that arrogance about him that really could get to people. Problem was, though, with why Buddy Rogers and Toots Mont knew this, and I don't know if Vince knew or didn't care. I don't know the story behind that. But Rogers had a reputation for going to a territory. As you know, there were many, many territories in those days. He would come into a territory, he would bring his group, whatever, and they would do all kinds of shangles and, you know what I mean, all kind of shotgunning, we called it, the territory. The trouble with that is that it worked in the beginning, and it would do great business.
Like hot shotting.
That's
get the gate up right away.
Exactly. But then it would slide and it would die. But what Buddy would do is pack up his gang and move on to a different territory. And then the promoter in that particular territory was stuck with a dead horse.
Yes.
And Toots, I think, understood that. So he was never, as far as the conversations I had with him, he was never a big fan of Rogers. Vince, on the other hand, was. And I think Vince respected the guy's ability in the ring because he was good and the way he looked and everything else. And Buddy, like I said, God rest his soul, but he was a terrific con man and maybe convinced Vince that, you know, all these things he could do and would do and all that.
Speaking specific to this title change or non-title change, as McMahon wanted, true or false? I'm going to give you a few true or falses throughout the course of this because there's so many myths that have come. Okay. Maybe you could shed light. True or false? McMahon goes to Stanley Weston, who ran all the wrestling magazines at the time, and tells him, do not report the title change. It never happened. Did you ever hear that?
No, I never heard that. That I didn't know.
Are people taking Rogers seriously as a world champion because there was a title loss that no one's talking about, or back then, because of the territory system, no cable TV,
right?
Were they really sequestered territories where you didn't hear what happened in Canada the other day.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he was recognized as the champion in the territory of the New York, okay? Well, I could say New York, but that territory.
Right, sure.
But in other places, NWA stood strong. The champion with NWA was the most recognized champion in the country-wise, and even overseas. So Rogers was really recognized as the champion, but only people believed him as the champion, but only in the Northeast. Outside that area was strictly NWA who was the recognized as the champion.
How was Buddy in the ring? Let's just talk about strictly workmanship, technical.
It's great. He was a great performance. The only problem is that even though I was, you might say, still kind of a rookie, not quite a rookie, but I wasn't, you know, I was still coming up. Because of my feeling of him and the stories about him, I was always tried to protect myself, because I knew that there were certain holds that he would do. For example, he would use a pile driver. You know what the pile driver? Well, if you ever heard of Sammy Berg, they had to put a steel plate on his head from the pile driver. If you ever heard of Eric Patterson, he got caught into Buddy Rogers, what they call the giant swing. And he made sure he lined himself up and let him go through the ropes to where he shot out into the audience, those harsh steel chairs, and he broke his leg, broke his arm, and he almost got killed. And there were others like that. I fell into that trap in Steubenville, Ohio, when Buddy Rogers was coming off the ropes, and he caught me with a body slam. But instead of slamming me in the ring, he slammed me, because we were part of the rope, he slammed me outside the ring, outside, you know, over the top rope and out. And you have to remember, in my day, we didn't have, like they have now, the paddings all over. It was strictly a concrete floor, and the chairs were very close because of the commission, doctors and all these commissioners. So there wasn't much space. So when I got slammed out there, I crushed chairs and stuff, and I got hurt. I really got hurt. And after that, if I wasn't 100% convinced, I became 100% convinced that when you wrestle this guy, watch out, you know, because of what he's, because even though he would swear and make you believe that he wasn't intentional, but I had never bought into that.
I gotcha.
Yeah, so he and I, you know, that's like I say, things went from bad to worse.
When should we start the calendar on the beginning of the WWF? Is it this day when Rogers is given the first title? Is it when they secede from the NWA? In your mind, when did the WWF really begin?
After he lost the title to Thez in Toronto.
Okay.
After that, they got all together, you know, Toots and Vince and Willie Gilzenberg and I don't know who else was in the meeting. They decided that they were going to form the World Wide Wrestling Federation, and they were going to go on their own, and that's when it came about. This
title was one of those tournaments in Brazil, which you might have heard about.
Yes.
Is where he won this title. How did that come about, the Rio de Janeiro tournament? Is this the first use of it, or do you remember having heard about the Rio tournament before then? Because I think Pat Patterson, didn't they use the Rio tournament when he had the IC title? It kind of became a thing.
Yeah, well, I wasn't familiar with that. I remember hearing in Canada about this thing with Rogers become champion. And to be perfectly honest with you, at the time I'm working all over Canada, I didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe they did have something.
They had the tournament?
Yeah, I didn't know. And no, I wasn't invited. So I didn't know. I found out later, of course, you know. That
What was it like tagging with Argentino Apollo?
What was it like?
Yeah.
Well, we were two completely different characters. I was at the time, I had been more or less of a strongman. I was doing a lot of strongman stuff, but now I wanted to diversify. I didn't like just using my strength in the ring. So I started, especially when I went to Canada, and I started wrestling some guys that I thought were pretty darn talented. Sweet Daddy Siki, if you remember that name.
Yeah.
You know, guys like Gene Kaniski.
Sure.
You know, I'm wrestling these kind of guys. I'm wrestling Don Leo Jonathan. And so I started to get away. I was still doing showing my strength because the fans seemed to like the idea that this guy is really powerful. They talked about my strength all the time. So I couldn't separate myself completely to that part in the wrestling ring. But I wanted to show that I could wrestle, and so I started using a lot more wrestling maneuvers, wrestling moves that I hadn't done previously till I went to Canada. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so that's when I like to think that I tried to make myself as the whole wrestler, you know.
Was it a good fit with Apollo, you think?
With Apollo, I felt a little awkward in a way. He was a very talented guy, but as you know, he was an aerialist, you know what I mean? And I was nowhere near that, you know. And so we didn't gel, I don't think, all that great because it was like two different matches almost that were taking place. You know what I mean? It was just different. I fit more like when Bobo Brazil and I would be tag team partners, or if Dominic DeNucci and I were tag team partners. It fit a little bit better because of the styles, you know what I mean?
Gotcha.
But again, Apollo, I think he was different, and that's why I thought that as a single performer, he could be able to be himself and make the whole match that kind of a match, you know.
The Kangaroos, often regarded as pioneers of tag team wrestling. Do you think that's a worthy designation?
I thought they were great. These guys were absolutely tremendous because they used terrific wrestling maneuvers, great wrestling stuff, and they could, you know, be villains, you know, in their tactics. But the variety of things that they could do in the ring, I thought that it made them really stand out. You know what I mean? Not to the fans' minds, might not be, because maybe they saw other teams that were maybe more aggressive, more vicious, more that. But as far as the techniques and what have you, these guys were great. They were. I don't know of anybody that I ever saw that was better. Well, Carpentier, again, he was a great athlete, great talent. As you know, he represented Canada in the Olympic Games as a gymnast and all that. So he was very, very good at that. And he became very, very popular. But like Rocca, you know what I did to better myself? I used to see all these stars, okay, that I admired and respected tremendously. But whenever they wrestled, if I was in a card with any of them, I would watch them. I want to study them. And what I learned very early on, especially when I was in Canada, I learned that watching Carpentier, watching Rocca, and watching some other people, that they, as talented as they were, and they were great at what they did, but what I also saw was that most of their matches were very similar all the time. And I, in my own mind, even though I was no veteran at this time, I saw something wrong with that. I really did. And so I put in my mind that if I was going to be the head guy, the headliner in Canada or any place else, that I was going to be different. I felt that that was extremely important. And that's really by observing, by watching. And I'll tell you how I was different, and I was different. There were people who judged me and they said, well, Bruno was too much of a brawler. And some said, but I looked at my opponent and I studied my opponent. And I didn't try to get him to wrestle my style. I wrestled his because I met different opponents all the time. And so if you met Hans Mortier, You went in there and you had a wrestling match because he was a European and he used all kind of beautiful wrestling maneuvers and that, even though he was an arrogant, like villainous type.
Right.
But if you remember him at all, but he was a terrific wrestler. Well, if you wrestled Kowalski, then you had a completely different match. You know, these guys were all great, but they all had their way. And so by me, if I'm the headliner, and if I'm meeting them in their own game, then they can say, well, yeah, here's what Bruno's doing, what he did last month. Here he goes again.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was different. And I honestly believe that's what made me last as many years as I lasted because of that. Now, again, you'll find those who criticize this or that, but the reality is that when it came to the bulk of the audience, they evidently bought what I was doing because, not bragging, but I was a headliner for 20 years, 20-some years in the business.
Absolutely.
So there had to be a reason for that, and that's what I believe the reason was.
Let's go back from Jump Street. Who tells you what's going to happen that night? Is it Vince Sr.?
Well, you have to understand that before that happened, that's what brought me back into New York. When I was contacted in Canada to come back to New York, I said no. I said that I was pleased where I was. I was offered a guarantee, a weekly guarantee of X amount of dollars.
From Tony? From Tony?
No. From Vince.
Oh, by Vince, to try to get you down.
To get me back. And frankly, you know, so keep in mind, now we're going back to 1963, okay? So when we talk dollars, you have to separate what was then and what is today.
You got to adjust.
First, he offered me $500 if I'd come back weekly, and I said no, that I wasn't interested in that. I was leery because of my past and the things that had happened there. So I said no, that I was happy in Canada and I was going to stay there. Calls me back maybe a few weeks later once we connected, you know, because first it was with Ace Freeman, if you know that name. He was running the Pittsburgh area for Vince. And when he called me again, he went up to $750 a week guarantee, and I said no. And he said to me, well, what will it take? I said, Buddy Rogers. I says, I want to wrestle Rogers. And he said, well, you know that there's bad blood between you and him, and that's not going to happen. I says, well, then I said, I guess it's not going to happen. I says, you keep Rogers, and I'm staying here with Frank Tunney in Canada. And that sometimes went by, and Tootsmont was very upset because the territory was in bad shape. They were in very, very bad shape.
New York.
Yeah, the whole territory, right. Vince's there. And they were, well, for one thing, at that time, we had been in very terrible terms, you know, because of the suspension and all that kind of stuff. So why would they call me? The only reason they called me was because they saw the success I was having in Canada, and they figured, my goodness, there's so many Italians and Latins alone, with them alone, you know, you could repeat what was happening in Canada. And so eventually Tootsmont told Vince, he says, look, he says, if we bring this guy in, he may be helping out, but he won't be the top guy. And so unless he's the top guy, like he was in Canada, how can we, you know? So in other words, he was saying that he agreed that I should wrestle Rogers.
Did Rogers go along with the plan right away when he was told?
No, he did not. He did not. In fact, he didn't know what was going to be. And
until when?
Until he went in the ring.
Oh, he thought he was going over that.
Yes, yes.
What do you say? Do you say anything before the bell rings?
Yeah, I said, you know, do your best, because I'm going to do my best.
Do you think he knew what that meant?
Well, he in all honesty, I don't know. He looked at me very strangely, and I know that I made it very clear. And I know because of my not trusting him, I didn't turn around to go to my corner. I backed to my corner. He turned around, went to his corner, and when the bell rang, Well, anybody who saw the match, I don't know if you know if it was. I came charging.
Right.
I came charging at him, and I slammed him against those ropes, and I was very strong in those days. Even though he resisted, but I scooped him anyway. I scooped him out of that corner, and I brought him up, and I gave him one heck of a body slam, and then I picked him up, and I threw him on my shoulder. I said, "Buddy, give it up, or I'll break your back," and he gave it up.
Did Vince Sr. and Toots know the match was going to be that quick?
I don't know. I probably doubt that. I don't think so, but I don't know.
So they were okay with allowing you to go to the ring and Buddy to go to the ring not knowing that he was going to give it up that night?
No, but Vince Toots was the guy who said to me, you know, I don't care what you do, if you can break his back. Toots didn't care. Vince wasn't quite like that. He didn't want to see that. He didn't want to see that up. He wanted to be regular. You know what I mean?
Contest.
Yeah, he really did. And in fact, afterwards, there a bunch of stories have come out of all this. But what happened after that is that Buddy, by the way, had claimed that he had a heart attack.
I was going to ask you, how did that come about?
It came about the way it was told me. He was talking, he was giving a talk in Camden, I believe it was Camden, New Jersey, at a banquet that he was in, and he was one of the speakers. And the questions came up, and they said, how did you lose to this guy 48 seconds? What happened? And he said that he had had a heart attack 2 weeks before, and that they literally carried him on a stretcher practically before he went in the ring. The truth is that Buddy wrestled till the day before I wrestled him in the ring. He was wrestling every day, but that's what it was, and he stayed with that story.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, he stayed with that story to the end. Yeah, but of course that was nonsense. Take me to the locker room
right afterwards. What happens? You come back.
Yeah.
Are you still babyfaces and heels separated?
Yeah, they were completely separated. They was on one side of the garden, and we were on the other side. So I never saw them or anything.
Okay. Does Toots or Vince come up to you in a congratulatory manner, or?
No, they didn't. I don't remember exactly what took place, but there was concern on Vince. Vince didn't want anything bad or anything like that. Like I said, he liked Buddy, he liked Rogers. Toots did not, and Toots was happy. I don't remember that night, but I remember because people went crazy. You know, after I beat him, people went so crazy. They grabbed me as I came toward the dressing room, and they were lifting me up on their shoulder. And geez, it was really wild. So in the dressing room afterwards with the commission, they were trying to hold people back from coming in after the police finally got me in there. So I have no recollection of Vince or Toots saying or doing anything. But afterwards, Toots Mont made the remark that he says, "Kid," he said, "that was great." He says, "and I think that now," he said, "things are going to be much better around here."
And they were. What'd you do that night? Do you remember, after the title win? Did you celebrate?
I stayed in the dressing room till everything quieted down. And then I walked. I was staying at a dive on 42nd Street called the Holland Hotel. I mean, a real dive. It's all I could afford at the time. So I went there. And on the way, there was a long, you know, those phone booths that they used to have. I stopped in there and I called up my wife. And because we were living the second floor of my parents' house at the time when we got married. And so I told my wife, I said, I'm in Madison Square Garden. I said, I just became the world wrestling champion tonight. She said, yeah, they just announced it on the 11 o'clock news in Pittsburgh. I don't know how they got the word there. And she says, Mom and Papa, she said, are here. And so my mom and my dad got on the phone, my sister and everybody, and they said, oh my God, we saw it in the news. Like, they were so excited, they couldn't believe it, you know.
Did you say, I'm going to see you 2 Sundays a month?
Yeah, I went back to my hotel at this place I was staying. I went there, and there was a deli around the corner. I bought me a chicken from the rotary. I got me a chicken and a quart of milk, and I went up my room, and that was my celebration for that night.
Let that forever be a world title celebration. Rotisserie chicken and a quart of milk.
That's what I actually
You young guys, that's all it takes. Did the fans take him, you know, the skipping around the ring with the cape and the dark glasses? I mean, at that time, were they implying that as the homosexual tease, kind of, or was it still too wholesome a time for that kind of heat?
As far as I knew, they were not. Okay. I saw what you're talking about in that, but I thought he was being a magnificent Maurice, this French, you know what I mean? That's how I interpret it.
More ethnic than...
Yeah, right. I did not take it the other way, no.
When someone like this comes in from the outside, boxer, football player, how smartened up do they have to be beforehand? Take Jersey Joe as a specific example. Was he smartened up?
I never knew. A lot of times they would tell them, just say it as you call it, but don't be so quick like to try to disqualify anybody. Go strictly by the, if a guy gets pinned and you have a count of 3, you count 3. They would tell him, if the guy, you tell him to break once and you count to 3 and he doesn't break, if he continues that, you disqualify. But they would tell you, don't allow it the count to go beyond 3.
Okay.
You know, and that's how they protected everything at the time.
Understood. Specifically boxers, though, when they get involved in wrestling at that time period, was there a little, because you're one-on-one combatants just like boxers, did they ever revert to that, yeah, but ours is real kind of thing?
No, the boxers themselves?
Yeah.
Oh, no. You have to understand, it was a different time. There were a lot of tough guys back then.
Right.
I'm talking about wrestlers.
Yeah.
And these boxers had great respect for those guys. They didn't think that they were anybody to fool with. They really didn't. Believe me, I know that for a fact. They did not.
Right.
You know,
well, maybe after they left the arena, but coming in, did they feel, were they that respectful as well?
When they came in the arena, in the dressing room, or after the match, extremely respectful. Okay. I had guys like Walcott referee me. I had Ezra Charles in Chicago referee me. I had two-time Tony Galento, if you remember him. He refereed me. And Jersey Joe Walcott refereed me a lot of times. And Jersey Joe Walcott was a good arm wrestler. And he would try some guys, and he beat a lot of the guys. But when he wanted to try me out, and I beat him pretty good. He said, he's telling the commissioner, he said, these guys are powerful, he says, I don't know that you'd ever want to tangle with any of them. They did respect, they had great respect at the time.
That's good. Talk about Bobo and where he fit in with the hierarchy in the company at that time coming in.
You mean what did the upper McMahons and them, what they thought of him?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you have to understand, Bobo Brazil was a gentleman. He never gave anybody any problems. He was the type of guy that, you know, he looked good for a big man. You know, Bobo was a very big guy. He actually weighed a little over 300. He weighed around 3'5", 310. And he looked well physically, you know. And when he went in the ring, he always, I think, gave his best. And so he was very respected. In fact, a lot of times when I was the champion, sometimes it happened that Baltimore and, let's say, Boston, it just happened that way that they both had to run the same day, the same night. I'd be in Boston, and they would put Bobo, let's say, in Baltimore or in Philadelphia or something like that. So they respected him greatly as a talent, and also as a meaningful talent, you know, to where they could put him in a spot like that, in a situation like that, and he would do okay. This
is a time when race relations are not what they were now. Did a guy like Bobo experience issues with management because of his race?
I don't know. In New York, he did not.
Okay.
Vince McMahon, Tootsmond, absolutely not. But I was friends with Bobo, and because we tag teamed, and so we traveled to different places sometimes. But he did tell me some horror stories about other territories, especially down south, where he couldn't stay at the same hotel with the others or go to a certain restaurant. That was, for me, it was painful to even hear, because to be perfectly honest with you, coming from Europe like I did, I didn't know all the history of the United States in that. And so to me, it was kind of a shock to know that some of these things were still going on in some areas, you know.
But New York was an area that was not.
No, absolutely not. No, I know that Vince McMahon, Entwitz Mondinem, Phil Zacco, Willie Gilsberg, they absolutely liked Bobo Brazil. They liked Ernie Ladd. They liked Sweet Daddy Siki. Right. They really did, and they treated him very well.
Along those lines, James Dudley was running the Capitol Arena at the time, which was a bit of a coup, right? Because didn't he run the building?
I know he was always there, but he was involved with boxing a lot. But then he was with Vince McMahon Sr., and he was always around with the wrestling matches as well. But with the boxing, I always thought, but hey, I'm not sure 100% on this, I thought he was more dealt with boxing, but he was tied in with Vince McMahon. He was a good guy, a very good guy, and I think Vince could depend on him on whatever it is that Vince wanted of him as far as the arena or whatever, I don't know, whatever went on. I really never knew too much about that, but I know that Dudley was always there, but they used to have fights there all the time too, and Dudley was always there. He was either a second to somebody, you know, with the bucket and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, in the corner?
Yeah.
In the corners.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We talked about Hans already, but I want you to talk about Madison Square Garden and its importance as the crown jewel of the Northeast Territory. The city, the fans, the building. Was it everything for you that we hear it is?
Yeah. I remember the first time I ever wrestled in Madison Square Garden. I wrestled Bull Curry, if you remember that name. And I got to tell you, I was very nervous because I thought, my God, Madison Square Garden? Do I belong to be in Madison Square Garden? I was nervous. I was excited. But I remember going in a ring, I was breathing heavy, like as if I had already been through a 30-minute match. That's how nervous I was, you know. And to see all those people and all that, it really did something to me. I don't know. But as time went on, and I, you know, became to accept it and relax with it and everything else. But one thing I never lost touch of, and that was the importance of that building. And I found out more and more of that as I traveled in different countries. For example, when I toured South America in 1966, I went all over. I went in Brazil, I went to Argentina, Bolivia, I went to Venezuela, and they would advertise me as from Madison Square Garden. That's, you know, wow. Madison Square Garden was the arena that they knew around the world, you know, so it was to me, it was the most important arena there was.
It was written that during the 60s, as the company grew and the success of your title reign, Vince Sr. would throw lavish post-show parties at Jimmy Weston's Supper Club in New York after the monthly shows. Who would we have seen there? Were there celebrities coming in? Were you guys accepted mainstream?
Nah, what you saw, Vince at Gallagher's, is that one you mentioned?
Jimmy Weston's?
Jimmy Weston's and Gallagher's.
Gallagher's was in the Garden, wasn't it?
No, Gallagher was a steakhouse on 47th Street, I think it was. Yeah, and Vince would have some of his friends after a Garden show. But people like Frank Tunney would come in from Canada, or if some other promoter, or some... remember an actor named Horace McMahon? Yeah, he played Night in the City. I forget the year. I remember seeing him with Vince and Willie Gilsberg, but I don't remember a large, or Weston might have joined them. And Vince used to treat all these people after the Garden, but I don't think it was ever more than that I've ever seen, more than maybe 10 people, 8 people, something like that. It wasn't no big deal. Not that I ever seen or recollect, no.
Very good. Did you mind losing a fall to Buddy Rogers, or was this kind of you saying, doesn't matter?
Well, Vince, you have to understand that, like I said, Vince liked Buddy. And when things worked out and everything, and he made that match and Buddy and everything was assured that it was okay, I didn't care. I didn't care because I thought, you know, he's here for a shot. It's a tag team match and whatever. And I wound up winning the match with a backbreaker on Johnny Barrett.
Barrett, yep.
Yeah. And Bobo Brazil, I don't remember what happened, but it was me and Bobo, you know. But again, I was careful that night, and I wouldn't let Buddy do anything that I didn't want him to do.
Did he say anything to?
No, we never connected a word. Nothing.
Okay.
No.
That was wise.
But the trust was not there, and therefore I would not go along with anything. I was when I was in there with Barron, okay, but when I was with Buddy, I was very careful of everything, and I made sure I stayed on top of the situation rather than allow him to take over in any way that I didn't feel comfortable or trusted.
Does he ever thank you for taking a fall?
No.
Okay.
No.
Should he have?
No, I wouldn't expect anything. As a worker, I thought for his style of Killer Kowalski, I thought he was great because, you know, he wasn't, didn't use all the greatest techniques as far as wrestling goes, but he did enough of it, you know. But he was Killer Kowalski, you know, aggressive and hard. And it was amazing to me. I had the utmost respect for him because of his great conditioning. That guy, whether if he had to go 10 minutes or if he went 1 hour, after 1 hour, he was just like he was with the 10-minute match, you know. And I still loved to wrestle him because that was a great test for me because I took great pride in my conditioning and to be in shape and all that. And to go an hour with Kowalski and go, you know, that pace and everything else made me feel great because I felt like, you know. And Walter was very complimentary. When he was interviewed, he would always say that if anybody ever had him take a deep breath in the ring, it was me. So that was to me very flattering, Kowalski saying something like that. But outside of the, let me tell you what a good human being he was. One time I wrestled him, it wasn't in the Garden, might have been Boston, I don't remember. But anyway, as he came out of the ring, people were so mad at him because he had done something, hit me with a chair or something, and I got counted out. Okay, as he came out of the ring after the match was over, people were taking shots at him. Even though the police were around him and everything, they were still taking shots at him. Kowalski's going like this, you know. And somebody asked him later, he says, geez, he took an awful lot of abuse. Why didn't you hit somebody back or to let the others know? Don't fool with me, you know. And he said, nah, he said, I drove him to that anger. Right. So he said, you know, I was responsible for it. He was a religious guy, a lot of people may have not known. He was very religious. He used to contribute something like 20% of his salary to his particular religion. I don't know his religion. It was called I Am, but I don't know, I'm not familiar with it, what it meant or anything.
What was it?
I Am.
I Am.
Yeah, that was the name of it. And so he was a very, very decent, very ethical human being.
This is one of your many sellouts at Madison Square Garden. You're drawing the biggest crowds in the country. You know, through the years, though, your critics have tried to take this away from you. I mean, this is an undisputed fact when you look at the gate. What are some of the things you hear that, oh, well, they only ran once a month. We had to do this every 2 weeks at the Mid-South Coliseum. You've heard that stuff. Is it just a natural try to knock the guy at the top down a little bit? Or is there any validity to what they say? No,
there was no validity to what they say. First of all, you have to understand that when you say once a month, that's 12 shows. I remember in the 60s when you mentioned Hans Mortier. I wrestled Hans Mortier 3 times in there, in something like 3 weeks, one time 2 weeks apart, the next 3 weeks apart, because Vince had to take those dates, okay? And we did great business. It's not that easy to be that consistent. And it wasn't just in the Garden. How about, what would you say about Boston Garden?
Sure. Philly.
About
Spectrum,
Philly.
Yeah.
You know, about Baltimore, about all these other places. To a degree, not all, because a lot of the wrestlers, I like to believe, gave you credit for whatever you were doing that brought these people in. But there's always those that would say, yeah, big deal. Look how many people there are in New York. Well, true. But I remember the same people were critical of that when they came into New York. They didn't do anywhere near. They were going to do 3 programs between Hogan and Flair, for example, and they cut it after 1 or 2 because they weren't drawing the crowds. And same thing in Boston and other places. So they found out that what they don't understand is you have the population in New York, but there's 1,000 things going on in New York with the theaters and the sports and all that stuff. You know, Los Angeles has a great population, and they were dead for years wrestling-wise. Well, you know, so it's not just the amount of people. It's there's a lot of competition all over the place, and to get that many people all the time, it's not that easy. And then a lot of these guys they were critical of that, but they found out for themselves.
When he gives you the finish, you tell him it makes no sense, because you're coming back the following month against Kowalski.
Right.
So following the match, you call Vince and say, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Don't put him on my shows anymore. I'm not going to work while he's there. True?
Well, yes, but here's the way it went. When I had done TV in Pittsburgh, so in those days all the TVs were live TVs. Mm-hmm. So I flew to Pittsburgh, I just did interviews there on the live TV because I had to plug the arena in Pittsburgh because I was going to be appearing there on next Friday, like, you know. And then I had to take one of those little putt-putt job planes, just me and the pilot, to fly me to Philadelphia. So, you know, I'm rushing like heck, and I get over there, and Buddy sent word from somebody else to talk to me and said to go 1 hour, okay? Mm-hmm. And I said, what? I said, how could it be? I said, I'm with Kowalski next month. And, but I knew Rogers was the agent, and I didn't say anything to anybody. I just questioned it. But then what I did was, after the match, I went the hour. Right? We had a terrific match for 1 hour. And then I had that guy wait with that little wee plane because I was going back to Pittsburgh because I forget. I had to go back to Pittsburgh. I don't remember if we had the show there, whatever it was. But that when I got back, it was late, very late. So I waited till morning, early in the morning, and I called McMahon. And I said to him, I'm going to tell you something. Don't ever have Rogers as the agent any place where I appear. I says, because if you do, I said, there's going to be big problems. I said, big problems. I don't like the guy. And I said, and I don't have nothing to do with him. Don't ever have him come near me for any reason. I said, where the heck do you get off me wrestling this guy for 1 hour when I have to come back with Kowalski next month? And he said, well, is that what happened? I said, well, who's calling the shots?
Yeah, really?
I said to Vince.
Yeah.
I said, I'm just letting you know. I said, you like Buddy, if you want him around, it's your business, but don't ever have him anywhere where I'm going to be. And that was the end of it.
I was going to say, he's gone from the company right after this. Do you feel that had something to do with it?
Absolutely, because you know, Buddy was demanding with Vince. He wanted to do this, he wanted to be there, and I was the headliner. So all the arenas, I'm going to be the headliner. And now he knew that he couldn't be in any of those spots. So that created more problems.
Was there bad blood when he left Capitol that he would come back and do this?
Well, it was out. I was the champion, okay? And Tony, from Argentino Rocca, he was no longer top banana, and he didn't like it. And so when they talked to him about forming a company and all that stuff, he jumped, he jumped right on that because he thought that they're forming a new company and he's going to be the big headliner again.
He really thought that he'd be able to?
Unfortunately with Tony, I like Tony, he was a good guy really, but Tony had seen his best days bound. See, that's why I'm telling you that what I learned from these people, that a lot of people don't understand, whether they're critics or whatever, they didn't understand that Rocca didn't last as many years as a lot of people think because he was too repetitious every time he went in the ring. I'm telling you that this is how I learned for myself what not to do. I couldn't do the aerial stuff Rocca could do, but I wasn't interested in that either because that wasn't me, you know. And by doing that, every time he wrestled, you saw the same kind of jump on your shoulder and then take you over with this, and people could call every move that was coming. So after a while, Tony was no longer the big attraction that he had been, and now, you know, he thought that he could be again. There are guys, you know, you can take baseball players, football players, you can be the greatest baseball player or the greatest football player, but it doesn't mean that you can be a good manager. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Some people have the minds for what is needed and who can do what best and who we need to make this change. Others don't. And there's a lot of guys in this business the same way, that they may have been good performers in the ring, but they were not great minds as far as ring psychology or talent, or, you know, how to...
You're running a company in any capacity. Yeah. Money.
So, you know, and Tony, unfortunately, was not one of those.
Talk about Gorilla. Here's a big guy who was tough as nails, breaks his ribs early in a match with you.
Yes, in the very beginning.
And goes the hour and 10 minutes. It's not this match, I don't think. But
no, we had an hour 25 minutes.
Insane.
An hour 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
And an legit amateur wrestler, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Listen, he was a tremendous guy. He weighed 420 pounds, legit. He really weighed that much. A lot of people used to say to me, he's so huge, and they think, but he's fat. I said, yeah, well, don't judge that. I said, because this guy, for such a big man, he could move. And if you can go an hour, 20 minutes or whatever it was, you know, that's pretty good. And like I say, I caught him in a maneuver to where I cracked a couple of his ribs. And that's I've cracked rib. That's an extremely painful thing. And to go on, continue on for that distance, that was awesome. Monsoon was a big man, yes, but he could move. In the ring, he could display good wrestling maneuvers. He was agile for such a big man. I mean, he could be very vicious, you know, as a villain. But he could do very good, great, you know, moves, professional and amateur style, like, you know what I mean? So I had the utmost respect for Gino because he was, for his size, I think he was one of the very best.
And a guy that the McMahons eventually see does have a mind for the business and move him into the role of running TVs and stuff later on. Did you notice that early on, that here's a guy who can put together a match and has the good psychology and maybe can spot talent?
To a degree. To a degree. He never had issues, but he disagreed sometimes on talent, and I think proved him wrong about certain guys that he didn't think belonged there.
Okay.
And I said, no. I said, Gino, I said, you're wrong. I said, this guy we're going to do business with. But he was a stand-up guy. Like afterwards, he would say, phew, I never thought that you could get that with this guy. You know. So he never had any issues with him.
He ends up buying into the company later on, right?
After I turned it down.
Oh, interesting.
I was offered to buy Toots out, Toots Mond.
How far in is this? What are we talking now?
I guess must have been maybe 1970, 70 something. I wish I could remember the exact year.
During your second run, maybe the second title run?
No, and then the first run, but toward the very end of it. Toward the end of it, and I had a problem why I refused, because I had an accountant who was also an attorney and even a judge in New York by the name of Bernard Spiegel. And I discussed it at length with him, and he said, well, he said, I know that you're comfortable with these people. He says, but you should demand that once a month at least, you should look at all the books and everything else to make sure that everything is okay, so that there's no question with the IRS, so there's no question with any kind of potential problems. And I, in a meeting, told Vince that, and Vince says, no, I don't want no outsiders to come in or involved in anything. And I said, well, then Vince, I says, I'll just go on and continue to wrestle.
Would you have been equal partners with, is that the
yeah, and I would have been the two partners. But after I turned it down, then Gino, Monsoon, and Phil Zacco each got 20%, and Arnold Skolin got the other 10%. And so that's how they're 50. And Vince was 50%. In the ring, Reggie was a very impressive-looking guy to start off with, but he was not a very technical guy to where you saw a lot of great, quick wrestling moves. But he was like a vicious, more or less, like him and Dick the Bruiser, for example, were a very successful team because Bruiser was a crazy flyer and everything. You know what I mean? Not flyer, drop kicking and stuff like that. You know, but he. You know, he would dive from the top rope with the knees. You know, he would. You could whip him out with the top rope outside the ring. Crusher wasn't like that, you know. But he stayed more in the ring and a villainous type thing. But at times, it's no knock. But he wasn't the most exciting guy to watch. The Bruiser was much more exciting to watch.
This takes place at the Civic Arena in Pittsburgh. We talked about the Garden. Talk about the significance in your life of the Civic Arena.
Well, the Civic Arena was very important to me because, as you know, that every 2 weeks, as I said, I'd come home for a day, every 2 weeks. So naturally for me, getting booked at that arena once a month was a treat because that meant that I come home and I would catch the first plane out from whatever city I was coming in from, and that meant that as early as I could, and if I could get out the same night from someplace, but in those days they did have some night flights. Not that many, but sometimes it happened that I could go home after the matches. Like for example, I wrestled in New York, and then I'd go to Pittsburgh. There was like a 10:30 flight, and actually I would, instead of going on last, I would go maybe next to last or whatever. So I could sometimes couldn't even take a shower.
Right, 10:30 flight.
Took the clothes on and ran to make that flight. But why? Because it meant that's going home. You know what I mean? So that's why the arena was very special to me, because they gave me that extra day whenever it ran to go home for the day. And also because it's my hometown and the people were very good to me there. The media was always, you know, the media, they talk about criticism about wrestling. Well, with me, they never did. They always, you know, said good things and wrote good things about me, which was very nice.
Take me through a typical week of television taping. Was it being done then as it was done later on, where you were shooting 3 weeks in one night?
No.
You were just doing the 1 week?
Now, those days when it was live television, then when they start no longer live television, that's when it started with this every 3 weeks and what have you.
So you're still live here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, when I go to Baltimore, that's why the TV was early, not by early, I mean early afternoon, like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, because then that night you went to wherever you were wrestling that night, whether it was, you know, wherever it may have been. And same thing with Philadelphia when you did the TV there, or Pittsburgh, like I said. These were all live TVs, and it made sometimes very tough traveling, because sometimes you really had to travel, I mean, go with the car to get to wherever you, like for example, we'd be in Sunnyside Gardens, then you were in New Haven, Connecticut. Well, boy, you really had to make some time. That's why we always get stopped by the police for speeding. We'd drive like maniacs to get there.
How were the TV shows run? Whose kind of wrangling the talent and giving the finishes? Is Vince there every night?
Yeah, Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
He was there for a capital. You know, when we did the TV for New York, there was live TV out of Washington D.C. on Channel 5 here in New York. That was live, and absolutely Vince was always there. And he was in Baltimore when we did the TV. Philadelphia, he would be there. Him and Toots Mondt would be there. Bridgeport, Connecticut, he would be there. Sunnyside, I don't remember if he would make all the Sunnyside shows, but he was very much there, you know. And he did make the TV matches, you know, Vince did.
I have another true-false for you here. True-false, you were the one that suggested to Vince, if you put me on TV less, people will come to the house shows to see me.
What it was not to put me on TV less, but to have me wrestle on TV less.
Okay.
I said I can't wrestle on TV. Once in a while, we'll give him a match on TV. But let me just come into interviews for my upcoming dates wherever they were going to be. I said, because if I wrestle on TV as often as you're suggesting or you want me to, I said people will have seen so much of me that they won't be as craving to come to the arena. I felt that would be overexposure of wrestling. I always believed that. But I thought when I do wrestle on TV, instead of wrestling, I don't want to throw a name, Frank Martinez, you mentioned one.
Right.
I said once in a while, once in a blue moon, let's give him a good match, like against Baron Cicluna or against Ivan Koloff. Somebody like that people will look at this match, you know what I mean? And there's always, because of TV, the time limits were short, that they have to, if you execute it right, they'd want to see that match whenever it was going to be publicized for an arena, big arena someplace, you know what I mean? And it always worked.
Was Vince receptive to your suggestions all the time?
In the beginning, not so, but as time went on and we kept talking, we would have meetings on Thursday, and when I made this suggestion, and he would give, you know, and then when he saw that it was getting very, very good result, he was more and more free into that. Like I said, when I'd wrestle somebody, he'd say to me, well, Bruno, he may be good for a match or so. I say, well, Vince, just wait, let's wait and see. Well, when he'd see that if we'd sell out and then say a good return match and the tickets would really go right from the announcement, then he agreed to, oh, good third match, you know what I mean? But, he was, as time went on, he was very, very good in letting me have that. Unfortunately, when I wrestled Gorgeous George was at the end of his career and in the beginning of my career. And when I saw that I was going to wrestle Gorgeous George in the convention hall in Philadelphia, I couldn't believe it. I said, I'm going to wrestle Gorgeous George, because I had seen him on TV years before when he was the big gun. Well, I didn't know when I came into the business at the very beginning that he was no longer the Gorgeous George, you know what I mean? His time had gone by,
right.
You know? And still, I couldn't believe it. But I'll tell you what it did for me that night. I never forgot it, and it stayed with me throughout my whole career. Gorgeous George was not a big guy. He was about 215 or something like that. At this time, I'm 275 when I first broke into business. I was really a big guy. And so I'm excited. I was, wow, Gorgeous George, I can't believe. So when we went in the ring, and they announced the Gorgeous George, and he went through, the girl was spraying the ring, and he had this robe, you know, and all this kind of stuff. People booed, you know, because he was a villain, let's face it. And I come on. Then when we started wrestling, I did, you know, like he took me what we call a front face lock, you know, and I picked him up. Of course, he was so light, you know, for me. And I would toss him, you know, halfway across the other side of the ring. And people started hollering, hey, Bruno, don't hurt the old man. Hey, old man, why don't you go home? You're done. You're an old man. You're finished. I heard those, and it really hurt me deeply. I thought, my God, this is Gorgeous George. This is how it is when you're no longer. And I swore to myself, I really got that, depressed me. I felt so bad for the guy that I said, That's one thing I swear to myself that I'm not going to do. I will not stay in this business longer than I should. I'm going to pay attention very carefully as the years go by. And when the time comes, I'm going to get out before this happens to me. And I did. If you know my record, I was doing really great. And then what was the last big thing I did? It was Larry Zbyszko. And we sold out everywhere. Sure. And after that, I retired.
Right.
So I can honestly say that I retired.
Made you come back and play with Piper for a little bit.
Well, that was unfortunate because I don't even count that as part of my wrestling career. I really don't.
Really?
No, I was kind of forced into it because my son was in
right.
And I was asked to put on the tights, and I said, "Are you kidding?" I said, "I've been out for 4 years. I had retired, and I said I'm here as a color commentator." I said my body was broken. I mean, that's before I started having all these major surgeries that I had. I don't want no part of it. But my son was led to think that if I would put on a tights tag with him, it would be a break for him. I never wanted to be said by my son that I didn't cooperate to where he could have had a break. And very reluctantly I did, but I was very unhappy at that time because I didn't feel I belonged in there. I didn't want no part of it. But the funny thing is, and it's not for my bragging, if you know about it, you'll know it. As old as I was at this time, and I came in the Garden, I went to Boston. We sold out all those arenas.
You drew in Philly, Boston, New York, absolutely.
Pittsburgh. We turned them away in my town in Pittsburgh. And so, but then finally I said, that's it. Enough is enough. And then other things happened that I was against. You know, seeing the Hulk area where the steroids and all that nonsense. And that's when I said I got to get out. I told my son. I said, you know, if you want to stay in the business, stay in it, but I'm out.
It was nice that you did that for him, though. Whether it's recognized by all or not, it was nice that you did that. Is it true Graham was Vince Jr.'s favorite wrestler when he was growing up? Even dyed his hair at one point blonde?
I never saw him dye his hair blonde, but I do remember him saying that his favorite wrestler was Jerry Graham.
Right.
And I looked at him at the time. He was I guess a kid, you might say. Well, a kid. I think Vince is about 10 years younger than I am.
Okay.
And so, yeah, he was a kid because at this time I'm like in my mid-20s, so he had to be 15, 16 years old. And he said that, and I looked at him like, I thought to myself, wow, that's his idol, you know.
Talk about the time where you accepted a challenge to do push-ups with the 300-pound Graham on your back.
Well, I had been doing strongman stuff in the ring. That's how it helped me get over in Toronto real big. I invited the Italian press to come and see what I could do. And I did some, not bragging, but I did some tremendous, I bench pressed 565, I did squats with 750 pounds. I did a lot of, you know, and all of a sudden the guy wrote an article that says, Il Sansone Italiano, which means the Italian Samson. And so I got the reputation, kind of being so powerful, you know. So over here, they always, even though now I wasn't a strongman anymore at this period when I was the champion and all that, because I told you in Canada I wanted to diversify, I wanted to do arm drag, I want to do wrestling, I want to do everything. But they still, you know, Vince naturally still wanted me to show strength because he felt that that was an important thing, that the people to believe how strong I was and all that. And so every now and then I did push-ups not only with Jerry Graham, but I did with Monsoon too. I did push-ups on TV with him. And I did do that. So what was the question? That whether I could do it?
It's an amazing feat. I mean, I just wanted you to address it.
Well, back then I was a strong guy.
Yeah.
I was young, big, and strong.
You don't expect a man of his size to be able to do 70, 80 minutes in the ring. What is the key First of all, what's the key for anybody, your size, my size, his size, to do a match that long?
Well, first of all, he was a big guy, as you say, you know, size-wise and that. But it's a kind of a life you live, too. You know, Monsoon was not a boozer. He didn't do anything bad. Even though he was so big, you say, what did he eat? Well, he had a great appetite, but the times I've seen him, he didn't eat just to feed on junk foods. You know, he ate good, but he ate large quantities. So he lived a fairly clean life that way. And because, remember, he had been a very good amateur, so he had done a lot of training in his day. And when he was an amateur, he wasn't 420 pounds, but he was in the 300-pound you know, weight. And so he would, even when he was big like that, he was not a guy who liked to train with the weights, but he would play handball and stuff like those kind of sport where you had to keep moving. And he was very, very active like that. And for a lot of people, for some reason, their conditioning comes easier. For some reason, I don't know, than others. I've seen guys that did work out a good bit, but didn't have that kind of stamina that they could go in there and do that. I really don't have the answer why that is.
But you have to approach a match like that differently than if we were going to go 20 minutes. Your approach has to be different. If you know you're going an hour, the pacing, you have to have a sense of that, when to speed it up, when to slow it down. Are you conducting that at this time for Gino or the other guys? Or is it just something you both understood?
Not always, but most of the times I did.
Slow down, kid. You know.
Well, if I saw somebody getting a little tired, I would put on a hold on them, you know. And well, I would roll that arm or something like that, get the people excited. The other guy may be getting a breather, you know.
I know you think it's no big deal to you to go 80 minutes in a ring. It's inconceivable to me. A rare battle between two top baby faces at the time. Did you like those kind of matches?
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I enjoyed Pedro, you know, when we went to Shea Stadium for an hour, 18 minutes. Because I believed, even though I was in a minority, most people did not believe, I believed that what we call a babyface match, that it would be a good thing once in a while. Not on a steady diet of it, but on once in a while, because I thought that it would be the kind of a match that people don't get to see too often. And that is two guys go in there and give a good scientific wrestling match. It's not the type of a match that you're going to come back with 3 return matches. It wouldn't work. But to give it a 1 match, or maybe 2, at the very, very most, with a very, you know, particular individual maybe. But I thought that it would be a good break off from the villain to the baby phase. And I just felt that it was good. And I used to talk to Vince a lot about that. And like I said, he was giving in that sense. And he said, okay. He says, let's go with another popular guy. And we did with Bobo. And I wrestled Johnny Weaver years before, who was a, you know, baby face.
You do a return here. You do a series of 2.
Yeah, with 2 matches.
With Bobo. Is this your, I guess this was your idea, right? You said to Vince, let me do this.
Well, when we wanted to do the first match, Vince said that why then, he said to me, do you think you could get 2 matches out of it? I said, yeah. I said, I think we can. And because that way it would break that pattern a little bit better. I wanted to do that more often in other places. But there weren't, frankly, there weren't the kind of guys around that fitted that and draw with it. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Yeah.
You know, it's hard.
Do the fans almost have to make a choice of who's going to be the baby face and the heel just for that moment? They got to cheer for somebody, right?
Like when I wrestled Bobo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as a fan sitting there, if you're my guy, Bobo's the heel for the night.
Well,
and then he can just come back as a heroic baby face for me when he's not in the ring with my guy.
Yeah, but
it's a formula that can work, right?
Yeah, because he may have been, let's say like he was a villain for the night, but he wasn't the villain.
He wasn't acting like
in the ring.
Right,
he didn't act like the villain. He was still, you know, he was still being Bobo. So it's not like he given the opportunity to wrestle Bruno, let's say, and now he's going to turn and become a vicious guy. He maintained Bobo Brazil. Bobo was Bobo, you know.
Right.
And so the people in that particular match, I think I got cheered more than he did, but he wasn't exactly booed that terribly. No. Well, Fred had a style of his own. You know, he was not the kind of guy that you were going to do a lot of arm dragging and the tackles and you know what I'm saying. He was
the vampire is what he was, for God's sake.
You know, but he had that ability to create that havoc with the fans.
You remember this night?
Oh, sure I do. He gave me a low blow, okay, and naturally, you know, I went down. And the people just went nuts. Even though they had the security around the ring, they couldn't control it. They were trying to get him in the ring. They were trying to go after him and everything else. And I got up and then I beat the hell out of them.
You think the business will ever have that passion again with the fans where just a low blow to the hero is enough?
No, I don't. I hope I'm wrong. I sincerely hope I'm wrong. But that's all gone. Look at the way wrestling is today. You have a lot of good talent that does a lot of good things. They move well, in good shape, all this kind of stuff. I don't want to take anything away from anybody. But the way it is, it's completely different to where, look at what happens. They give it so much on television that they cannot go to the arena and come there monthly. They would die. They would, you know. But once in a while they can hit and run. They have a lot of good talent, you know, on TV that they put them all in, whether it's the Garden or Philadelphia, wherever they go, that maybe it gets the job done. But they can come back because there's no story, there's no return match that, you know, like it used to be.
Freddie Blassie wrote in his book that Gilly Rizzo, Frank Sinatra's guy, pulled a gun on him in a locker room, and you were the one that stepped in and defended him. Is that true?
No, he did threaten me. I didn't pull a gun. No, Fred exaggerated that. Gilly got so angry, he said to me, he said, I'm going to take care of this guy. And I said, no, I says, I want to take care of him. I said, I'm going to come back with him. I says, and I'm going to take care of him. I says, please. So he was mad as heck.
Oh, because of the angle?
Yeah.
Wow.
He was so mad. And I said to him, no, I said, Gilly, I said, please. I said, I'm going to challenge him in Madison Square Garden. He says, and I want to have that opportunity to really tear him apart.
Saved his ass. Roosevelt Stadium, remember the venue in Jersey City?
Yeah, I remember that place. I don't know how many times I wrestled there, but it was more than once.
Yeah.
I probably wrestled there maybe 2, 3, 4 times. I don't remember. But I wrestled there several times.
Those passionate New Jersey fans. Now, this is before Lou got big and, you know, a little goofy. Talk about early Lou Albano for me.
Well, if you saw Lou Albano when he was young in the business, he was a good-looking athlete. You know, he had played football, you know, in Alabama University on Bear Bryant.
Bear Bryant's team?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he was on that football team. He got kicked out because Lou was a very hot-tempered guy, and Lou used to get into situations quite often, you know. And he was wrestling a little bit amateur, so then after football, I don't know the connection, how he started training, but he started training in wrestling, and he became a pro. As a wrestler, he was never, and this is not a put down, he was never what you call a great wrestler, you know. But he was, there was something about him that I saw. As time went by, I said, I heard him make some interviews. I said, this guy shouldn't be wrestling so much. He should become a manager because he's got the gift like unbelievable. And there were certain wrestlers that they couldn't promote themselves when they had to do an interview to talk about the upcoming match. They just weren't that good in getting that heat by talking about this guy. They needed a mouthpiece. And I felt that Albano, so I talked to Vince about that. And Vince says, well, if you really believe that, he says, let's give it a shot.
Back then, later on, he would go on to be the wild party guy in the locker room with a bottle of vodka in his hand. Wow. Was he taking it more seriously back at this time, 64? Was he not the wild party guy with the bottle of vodka in his hand?
You mean before he became a manager?
Before he became a manager, yeah.
As far as I knew, but I never, again, I was never around these guys that much after the matches, wherever they went.
But in the locker room?
No, in the locker room, absolutely not. No. I think that they came about when he wasn't a wrestler anymore, that he felt he didn't have to worry about being in the greatest shape and all that. And, he gained a lot of weight and all that kind of stuff. When they talk about top guys, top wrestlers, and top this and that, he's another one of these guys who's not mentioned too much, and it's a shame, because he was better than most. He was very, very good. Always in shape, 260, 265 pounds, good-looking guy. Again, no steroids, none of that nonsense. These were guys that were legit.
Why is he overlooked? Just fall through the cracks?
Yeah, I think so, because when they write about the great wrestlers and everything else, because he retired at a reasonable time in his life, and it was because of all this internet and all this stuff that's going on now, they kind of fall through the crack, as you say. Another guy's Bobby Duncombe. When do you ever hear of Bobby Duncombe? And in my book, in my opinion, he was one of the best guys I ever wrestled. But yet I never hear his name mentioned anywhere. And I thought he was great. So, it's just...
You brought him in, didn't you?
Yes, I saw him in Japan, and I was very impressed. I'm wrestling Shohei Baba, but I was watching whenever I saw American wrestler that I wasn't familiar with, I'd go watch his match. And when I saw him wrestle in Tokyo, I forget if it was Tokyo, one of those, he impressed the heck out of me. And I thought, boy, I'd like to see this guy come to New York. He was a 300-pound blonde guy, and I saw the way he moved in the ring, The guy was great. And I went and I came back and I told Vince, I said, Vince, I saw this guy in Japan. I said, I think he'd really be great over here. And he says, well, if you think so great, he says, get him, bring him over.
Was it played up in those days to draw the house that here's a former AWA champion coming in, or would you not mention outside competition?
No. It was strictly, we took each individual as that person that we felt if he was the type that you could do good business with in all the arenas, and that's all that mattered. What was best for this club? What's his best thing to come back with and all that kind of stuff. But never looked at, he was champion over there, so let's beat him so it makes me look even bigger.
But would you use it for a promotional thing just to give him credibility to say, here's a former AWA champion? Or
the announcer may have done that. Okay. At the time I couldn't even hear because I'm in the ring or wasn't paying attention. But I'm sure they probably would say stuff like that, but always build him up as a great wrestler, great champion, all that kind of stuff.
No longer a part of the NWA, WWF, but you're being lent out, is that fair to say?
Let me tell you what is fair to say, and it's the truth. We got so big with the WWF that, as I told you before, with Buddy Rogers, when he became champion, that short time, he was looked upon in the Northeast as the champion, but every place else was the NWA champion. Well, that was no longer the case. It was the WWF champion that was recognized all over. The NWA was shrinking very quickly as far as the title. As far as the title, when Japan would call me, they would bring me in as the world champion. When I went to Australia, I went as the world champion. Tour South America, I went there as the world champion. They weren't recognizing You know, they might say, you know, so-and-so is an NWA champion, but I mean, before they would never announce anybody else as a champion.
Right.
So the WWF really, in all honesty, I believe this with my whole heart, they became the biggest organization in wrestling.
Why was it worth it for Vince Sr. to do that with you? He had seceded from the NWA, didn't want to be part of it. And you're the crown jewel now in New York. Why send you to Miami?
Because other promoters were asking for my services, and Vince loved it because here's places where they would only recognize the NWA. Now they're recognizing the WWF, which only meant that the WWF was spreading and it was getting bigger and bigger everywhere. And that was important. Right. And I think Vince was very smart in allowing me to go to Tennessee, Florida, California, both the North and South, you know, for Shars and for Mike LaBelle in Los Angeles. Yeah. You know, I went to Chicago, I mean, you know, everywhere.
Right.
And that was the idea, and it worked.
So it was to announce the prestige of the WWF title.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Well, he was the promoter, and he was the head of the WWF, and naturally, like anybody else, he wanted it to be #1, and I think he did that.
Chris Dundee, a name you don't hear very often.
Yeah.
Tell me what was working for him.
I think he was more into boxing, even though his brother, you know, was the big boxing guy, Angelo Dundee. Yeah. I think Chris was involved in a lot of boxing, but he wanted to be in wrestling too. And so I can't honestly tell you what area he covered, because when I wrestled for him, the times that I did was the Miami Beach Auditorium. Yeah. And so I only know of the times when I went there. I don't know how often he ran over there, or what a lot of the talent he used. I really knew very little. I know that I was booked to go there, and I would go, wrestle the next day, catch a plane, and I'm out of there.
Right.
So I didn't know too much about the going-ons over there. I thought that he was a pretty good talent. He came into wrestling, and I thought that he was doing well. But the fact that you say he played for the Jets, he really didn't make a big hit in New York. Like he did in the Carolinas down south. You know, I don't understand that, because I don't understand. In a way, maybe I did, because football fans and wrestling fans were two different fans. You know, they were not the same fans. So as a wrestler, he was a good card. Don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting that he didn't mean anything, but he wasn't a big card here, where they thought that, being that he had played for the Jets, they had high hopes that he was going to be much bigger than he became.
He's actually gone very shortly after this, and the story goes, true or false, he's upset over a payoff, and he turns a table over onto Phil Zacco, and that was the end of him. Did you ever hear that?
No, I never heard that, so I don't know.
Is it something Wahoo would do, knowing Wahoo?
Well, he had a temper.
Okay. Puerto Rico has later gone on to kind of have an identity like the Wild West. Was it like that in the 60s? Was it kind of wild and unruly?
You mean as far as what?
The locker room, the fans a little bit, bringing gimmicks to the...
As far as locker room, I don't remember anything unusual. But in the matches, they could react pretty violently at times, you know. Good thing for me, I was okay there, because Castillo, as you mentioned, he was a villain. They didn't care. And he was not Puerto Rican. I think he was Cuban.
So you were able to still be babyface?
Right. And so I had no problem. But I wrestled a lot of different guys over there, but a lot of them from here.
It's an obscure challenger from your past. Do you remember the Golden Terror? It was Clyde Steves.
Yeah, that was.
Mask,
I thought he was the Black Shadow.
Was he? He might have been the Shadow as well. I actually wrestled as the Masked Shadow a couple of years earlier, and then became the Golden Terror.
Okay. I remember him better as the Black Shadow.
From black to golden.
Yeah. Okay.
Zembo Mosque. Any Zembo Mosque stories? That was a mainstay of the Northeast Territory for years.
Do I have any memories of
Memories
that arena?
of special memories of the Zembo Mas?
No, just that I wrestled there. I don't know if once or twice, but that's about it.
Prior to this feud, he was your tag team partner.
Right. A few times, just not steady. Occasionally.
He had tagged with you, but then he turned on you.
Yes.
And this becomes a hot program for the year when he turns on you.
Absolutely.
And draws sellouts. First, talk about the angle with the switch. Is it your idea, his, Vince's? How does it come about?
Boy, I tell you, I honestly don't remember, but I believe that there was something that Vince and I discussed, and I think that was meant to be from the beginning when they first brought him in, because didn't think of we thought that he would be much more successful as a villain than he would as a babyface. How
was he to work against?
I liked Bill. When I say I liked him, I respected him because, Bill had been a ball player in Oklahoma, and he was also on a wrestling team, so he was very talented that way. He was a guy 6 foot, I don't know, 3 or 4, whatever he was, and he was in the 300 pounds, So and when this happened, it became a very odd item. But unfortunately for him, I was wrestling him in West Hempstead, Long Island one time. And we had wrestled already in a lot of the major, even ballparks. We wrestled at the ballpark in Washington, D.C. I wrestled him in Forbes Field in Pittsburgh. But what happened, we were halfway through what was scheduled, because I was going to wrestle him more times in other places. But what happened to him, and it was, to me, it was no fault of his at all. We were wrestling in West Hempstead, Long Island, and when he came out of the ring after the match, I was in the ring. He came out, and on his way out, this guy, even though Watts had a cop on either side, this guy came from behind him and got him on his shoulder to Watts, and he sucker punched Bill Watts, and he caught him right in the jaw. And it stunned him, but he didn't go down, And Watts, he had a temper too. And believe me, if I'd been in this situation, I would have done the same thing. Well, he turned around and he hit this guy, and then the cops tried to stop, and he shoved the cops, and he put the boots to him. And I mean, he was a tough guy, Bill Watts. And after that, there were charges. They were going to sue him. He was going to be arrested. All this kind of stuff, and we had to get him. He had to leave. And he left, and it was a shame because he had been very successful up to this point, and that success would have continued, but never had the chance because of that incident in Long Island.
He had some very nice things to say about you in his book. Quote, Bruno wasn't very flashy, but he had incredible psychology. At 285 pounds, he was so powerfully built that he didn't do a lot of fancy things in the ring. He didn't do a bunch of drop kicks or head scissors, but as far as understanding the match, the picture he wanted to paint in that match, he was great. What's the key to great psychology?
You're wrestling, and you're building something, like you're telling a story in that ring. You have to know how to tell the story and how to go about it. And then you have to have an ear out for that audience. It's very important to see if your story is getting the message, it's getting out there, it's getting picked up. And it's not easy to do, and not suggest that I was the only one with that gift, because there were a lot of great guys that did that. But not everybody. A lot of guys were followers. They were the leaders and the followers. You know what I mean? And I knew what I felt. I believed that I knew how to conduct a match to get the people into it all the time. And then at the end, if the match ended in a controversial stuff, they would upset the people. They couldn't wait for that return match to come back to it. And that plays a very important part. I think that's a lost art. I see guys in the ring today, they do a lot of great moves, a lot of good stuff, but I don't see any of that psychology to tell that story.
You said there were leaders and followers, and if one guy's calling the match, we'll call him the leader for argument's sake. Now, who were the guys from this time that you would have been comfortable following? letting them call it.
That I would have been.
Yeah.
Ray Stevens.
Okay.
Ray Stevens for one, absolutely. Kowalski, Gene Kiniski, Harley Race, good. There's others, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Waldo was pretty good too, Von Erich. Monsoon, pretty fair, pretty good. One of them was a really old, beat-up arena.
Capitol Arena.
Capitol Arena.
Yeah.
It was really old and really looked like beat up and really needed a facelift in the worst way, you know. The other arena was different, you know. It was more kept.
It was an upgrade.
Yeah, upgrade and
national.
bigger.
Okay.
And bigger, so it made for a better look because you had bigger audience, and so on TV you could see it and it looked better than the other.
Legitimate shooter?
Was he a shooter? Yeah.
Bill Miller?
Absolutely.
Amateur wrestler
Yeah.
also, right?
Oh yeah, Big Ten wrestling champion. He was very good.
Someone you respected.
Absolutely. Big man, 6'5" or whatever, 320 pounds. I wrestled him many, many times.
Yeah.
In fact, Vince was very leery when I suggested to Vince that Bill Miller, we should bring Bill Miller in because I thought he was a great talent. Vince wasn't too crazy about the idea because I don't know if you ever heard, but in Columbus, Ohio, he got into it with Buddy Rogers in a room, and he worked Buddy Rogers over a little bit. And so Vince thought that he was, you know, a dangerous guy to have around. And I assured Vince, I said, I think the guy's a great wrestler. I said, I think I could do well, really well with him. I said, so don't worry about it. So I'm the guy that's going to be wrestling him, you know. I said, don't worry about it. And so he said, well, again, I have to give Vince that much. He allowed me to do these kind of things.
Right. But that's not the interesting thing about that night, Bruno. The interesting thing is the belt was stolen.
Oh, yes, okay.
From a locked car, right?
Yeah, Arnold Skolin's car.
Near Times Square, right? What's
we were going to the Spindle Top, met Vince McMahon, Sr. We were having, Vince said to me at the Garden, he said, Bruno, because I used to go to a restaurant, Italian restaurant called Del Some, which was right down the street from there, great Italian restaurant. And Vince says, Bruno, tonight come to the Spindle Top because there are some people there that really want to meet you and get to talk to you. He says, and I've been promising them, so how about it tonight? And I said, yeah, okay. So Arnold, of course, was with me. I had my bag in his car, the suitcase, and was in the back seat of the car. Well, we didn't worry about it because in front of the Spindle Top, they had a doorman. So when we parked the car, we were comfortable because the doorman was there, and we told him, you know, you're going to be here, right, for the car? The guy said, yeah. Well, it was one of those nights where everything dragged on inside. The doorman was way up past time and he was gone. When we come back out, the window of the car was broken. I guess that's how they opened it, and they took the whole suitcase with the belt and everything. And
should have gone to Del Some.
Should have gone to Del Some. Right?
Let that be a lesson to everyone out there.
That's what happened.
It's promoted by Abe Ford. Now,
well, promoted by Abe Ford with Vince McMahon.
Of course,
Vince is the promoter. You know, he was the local promoter.
They didn't do anything without Vince's approval. That's understood. But now, prior to this, though, Tony Santos is the promoter who wouldn't he do the thing like Hobo Brazil is coming to town?
Well, that was,
Bruno Sammartino?
Right. No, what that was he hooked up with Jack Pfeffer.
From Los Angeles?
Jack Pfeffer, don't you remember he was a promoter
But
here?
he wasn't out in California? I thought he was running, when he was
Maybe
with the girl, he was running
yeah,
more
with the
stuff
girls
out there?
too.
Yeah.
But Jack Pfeffer, when he hooked up with Tony Sand, he's the guy who came up with all these names. Hobo Brazil, Bruno Sammartino, I forget. He came up with all these kind of crazy names, yeah.
But now the real Bruno Sammartino, it comes to Boston. Talk about Abe Ford for a minute. That's a name you don't hear much when you hear about the history of the company.
I thought Abe Ford was a class guy. He was a very, very nice guy. I don't know what transpired years before when they were not in the best of terms. But then whatever the situation was, at one time, I don't know if it was somebody else promoting there, but when I was a real rookie, I wrestled in Boston a couple of times. This is before I was blackballed and then I left for Canada. So I'm not sure who, I thought that Vince and Toots were the promoters there. If there was a local promoter, I was too naive or green in the business to know. Then all of a sudden something happened that they were no longer cooperating with each other and there was no more.
Right.
Then some years later, after I got the belt and that's when they, whatever, how they worked it out, Abe Ford comes into the picture. And Abe Ford and Vince, I don't know if they were partners, but because but he was the promoter there. But Vince, of course, was the big guy because he's the guy who's supplying the talent, the television, everything. And then from that on, we were steady Boston throughout the rest of my career.
Can you spot a guy who has it? Who you say, oh, this is a guy I'm going to meet in 10 years in some capacity?
He came to Pittsburgh, and I wrestled him of TV, one of my rare TV matches. Not that he was a name or anything, but he looked very, very impressive. And I think I might have seen him once before. And so I liked this, and I thought that, could go on TV and have a great TV match with him. But I remember then, after seeing what he was like and everything, I told McMahon, Vince, I said, there's a guy we got to bring in there. I didn't know him with his real name at the time. I think he used the name Red McNulty or something like that. I'm not sure. Because I never knew his previous names. Ivan Koloff became the name,
right.
And I was impressed with him from day one, you might say. And Ivan Koloff was a great, because here's a guy who could do great high spots, all that kind of stuff. And he was a big guy, not in height. He and I were probably close to the same, but he was big. He weighed about 300 pounds, 295, 300 pounds. And I was 275, 280 at the time. And for two pretty big guys, we could really move in that ring. We gelled really well. And I thought, man, this guy's terrific. And that's how I talked Vince into bringing him in.
Were the midgets treated as equals in the locker room?
By whom, you mean?
By all the other wrestlers.
I thought so. I never saw anything. No, I never saw anything derogatory or negative, because there were some really good guys like Sky Lolo, Little Beaver. There were some of the other names. I remember them just being guys that as wrestlers, and nothing different.
Did you feel that the comedy matches of the midgets had a place on the card? In that respect, I think that I could get some of those people could criticize me. I didn't believe too much in having the midgets too often, and I didn't believe too much in the women wrestlers. I just didn't go into that. Nice to tell Vince about it. My feelings, nice to say, you want to use them, fine, but let it be a rare occasion and not a steady. And if you were around during my era, you didn't see them that much. Occasionally, you might see them come in for a show. Mm-hmm. I just didn't believe that. We had critics in the wrestling game, and we deserved a lot of the criticism by the things that we ourselves did.
You know what I mean? Like the gimmicks, for example. You mentioned this, the golden...
The Golden Terror, the Wolfman.
The Wolfman, stuff like that. I was never for any of these things. I said, that's inviting the criticism to our business. I was very strong and wanted to give the type of wrestling that I thought that would be credible to the people and even to the media, if it was possible.
Right. It diminished from the athletic competition that was
right,
putting out
exactly,
there.
yeah.
You act as the booker. You get some promotional help from Ace Freeman, right?
Ace Freeman, and I brought in the guy who started me out, Rudy Miller.
Miller, right, okay. Right. Is this a separate entity from the WWF?
Well, the WWF had it. It was part of their territory. And Tootsmond was there, living there at the time, and Ace Freeman was more or less running the show. Vince didn't bother with that area. He allowed them to do what he did. But it was a disaster. They were losing money all the time. It was doing very poorly. At this stage, I'd been around 4 or 5 years as a champion. So I felt that I knew what the problems were. And Vince said to me one time, well, if you think, why don't you buy it? And I said, well, if I can, if it's reasonable. And he was reasonable in selling it to me. The deal I made, I think I paid him small, like $10,000, $15,000 up front, and then I was to give him 10% of the Civic Arena monthly, okay? And I really believed that I knew the problems, and the reason why I bought it was because I really believed that I could turn it around.
What were the problems?
The problem was Ace Freeman was a good guy, but like I say, everybody's got a different mentality about what's good and what isn't. Ace Freeman had the world champion, let's say Weber, I was the world champion, okay? Then he had the United States champion, he had the Southern champion, he had the TV champion, he had the Hungarian champion, he had the Canadian champion. Every match was a champion of some sort. It was a joke, nobody bought into it. So when I bought it, and I set Ace Freeman down, and Rudy Miller was unemployed at this time. He had a thing with McMahon and Tootsmond, mostly, and he was in the outs. So I felt bad because he had started me out, and he contacted me when he found out I got Pittsburgh, and he wanted to know if I could use him. So I said, yeah, Rudy. So I brought him to Pittsburgh, and him and his wife got a little apartment. And I had the meeting one day when I had the time while I was doing all this. I had to have a couple of days off because I wanted to make. And I got Ace Freeman. I said, Ace, you're free to stay here with me. I said, but there's going to be all changes, and it's going to be the way I say it. If you can accept that, fine. If not, feel free to go elsewhere. He says, oh, what is it? I says, there's going to be no more champions. I said, there's going to be the world champion, which is me. I said, there's going to be the tag team champions, which at the time I think were the Kangaroos. I says, that's it. He said, geez, he said, you're taking away the people. I said, no, Ace, that's what killed this territory. That's why this territory. Look, I said, Ace, what are you drawing? You're not drawing flies. Civic Arena with Buddy Rogers on top prior to him, I think. They drew 2,000 people. Place holds 19,000. Right. I says, everything is dead. I says, why do you suppose that is? No. I said, Ace, you're welcome to stay, but it's going to be 100% my way. Okay, he said, okay, but he thought I was wrong. But I did that, and started bringing in some of my own talent. But the only trouble is I'm so busy with my schedule. I'm traveling around, and I'm on the phone all the time telling Ace, here's who I want you to call, here's what I want you to do, here's the TV matches. At night, I'd be in my room, and I would work out my TV matches and all that kind of stuff. And it was very difficult. I did that for 7.5 years. And finally, I'd had it, I wanted out but I turned it around and made it very successful. Vince McMahon was pulling, he couldn't believe it. He said, because we had some sellouts. I'm not going to tell you every show was a sellout, no. But we had a number of sellouts, and we had a lot of great houses where maybe 1,000, 2,000 from a sellout, you know what I mean? We completely turned it around, and then somebody wanted to buy it off of me, and I sold it, I think it was around 1972 2, maybe, somewhere around
Did
there.
Vince Sr. have a piece of that gate at any of your gates at all? You were functioning completely independent. You would appear there as the world champion, but that was the only connection to WWF.
That's it. Everything was mine.
Take me through that. You're already working, you're getting what, 2 Sundays a month at this point?
2 Sundays a month, that's right.
Now, when they first come to you with this idea to take the title and unify, you would have basically lost your freedom to ever go home.
Well, first of all, they didn't even bring me into this thing. They were having meetings, and it was Vince, Toots Mond, I believe Willie Gilzenberg was involved in some of those meetings, along with Sam Muchnick,
right,
and Bobby Bruns, and I don't know if anybody else. I know Luthez appeared in a couple of those meetings, but I was never invited. I was completely not in it involved, even though it was involving me, but I had nothing to do with it or anything. What was the problem? The problem was that they were negotiating back and forth. Sam Muchnick had certain territories he had to cater to, so he needed the champion X amount of days per month. Vince McMahon, who had all the biggest arenas in from the country, when you took the Northeast, all the biggest arenas were here per territory. Every place else, it had, like the San Francisco, would have the Cow Palace, or but that was it. The others were all secondary, smaller club. But Vince had all the big clubs. So Vince is negotiating with Muchnick, Vince and Toots and them. But they're saying, no, well, we need the champion for X amount of days. So it was like Vince wanted me for like 19 days a month, and Muchnick wanted me 18 days a month. That's how they were going. And then Phil Zacco, whom I liked very much, he was a good guy, said to me, he used to talk funny, he said to me, "Hey kid, I want to talk to you." So I come in, he says, "Listen kid," he says, "I know how much," because I used to open up to Phil, because he was a good guy and he was a good friend. I used to kind of moan to him about, I said, "Geez, I never get home, my wife's unhappy, I don't get to see my parents, and they're up there in age." I said, "I don't know." And so he said to me, "Kid, come here." He took me to his own little room, and he said to me, "I'm going to tell you something, you keep it to yourself. Don't say it came from me." He said, "But they're having these meetings about, the title." He says, "But they're talking about the dates, and if they get together," he says, "I'm going to tell you up front, he says, you will not have 2 days off a month. You will be wrestling 30 and 31 days a month, whatever that month held." Right. He said, "You will not have any days off, because they're having a problem with Vince needs you so many days and Sam Muchnick so many days." At that point, I let a little bit go by, and then I called a meeting. On a Thursday when I had to go to TV, I called a meeting, and I got Vince, I got Toots, I got Willie Gilzenberg, Phil Zacco. I think that was it. And I said, "Look," I said, "I don't know what's going on. I really don't." I said, "But I'm hearing all these rumors about bringing in one title." See, by this time, the WWF, that's why this thing came about. You remember I told you about I was going here and there, they were recognizing. The WWF became #1.
Right.
NWA was, believe me, it wasn't with us at all. So he said, I said, "I'm hearing this about unifying the titles." And I haven't been in any of the meetings, but I understand that the problem is who gets what dates. So I said, so let me make one thing clear while you people are negotiating, so you know where I stand. I says, right now I'm getting 2 days a month, and it's not enough. My folks are old. I don't see my wife, my kid. I said, I'm going to talk to Frank Tunney to let him know that I can't continue like this. Frank's a good man. I think he'll understand. I said, but as far as you guys, I says, I don't care if you get 20 days, and if they get 3 days, whatever. I don't care how you work it out. I says, but I'm telling you right up front that every Sunday from now on, I'm going to go home to my family in Pittsburgh. I says, now, I want you to know that. Take those 4 Sundays out. Now work out who gets what days and whatever. And Toots Mond right then and there said, Vince, I was never crazy about this idea to start off with. He says, we need Bruno because they have too many big clubs. He said, I don't think we should go through with this. Well, then they more or less said, well, we'll discuss it. And I was out of the picture. And then what happened, the discussion came that it couldn't be worked out. And that's the true story on why the thing never happened.
I'd also heard that Thez was beginning to make unreasonable money demands, saying he wouldn't get it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of stories about with Thez, which a lot of them are ridiculous and stupid and not true. What Thez wanted, because he knew it's not. But look, Thez may have been a great talent. He was a great talent, and he was a big card maybe before my time in the 30s and the 40s and that. But in all honesty, he was no longer. He was no longer. When they gave him the belt off Kaninsky or whatever, or Kaninsky got it off of him, yeah. But it wasn't working. I remember him coming to Canada. I remember, and he just, his days had gone. But so what Thez wanted, he wanted that we would work return matches all over the country in all the major arenas, because he figured to get a heck of a big year out of it and then bow out altogether.
Oh, okay.
And but then, like I say, it never came about. Now, some stories have been out that Thez wanted
$100,000.
Nonsense.
Okay.
None of that was true. Well, what happened? He lost it to Kaninsky. Did he get 100,000?
No.
Yeah, stories that came out were ridiculous.
How was Tony behind the scenes?
Clown, good guy. I don't mean that in a put-down way.
No.
He was just a funny, crazy guy. He was like always kidding around, always clowning, always, but a good guy, good guy. But
part of your crew?
I had no crew.
You didn't travel like certain guys you preferred to be on the road with?
No, I never traveled with anybody. If I ever traveled with anybody, yeah, like if we went from Sunnyside Garden to New Haven, yeah, I'd go usually with Arnold Skoland, sometimes Angelo Savoldi, sometimes me, Dominic Danucci.
Right. Cicluna?
No. Never traveled with, regardless what anybody wants to say or claim or anything like that. It's all a bunch of bull when people say that they saw so-and-so with so-and-so. I never traveled with a heel anywhere, ever. Wouldn't do it. A lot of people were critical of him who saw him years and later. They said, what the heck he was great in the 60s. What happened with him was that he had a wife and a son that he put through school, and he didn't want to travel. So when he should have left the New York territory, the Northeast, he should have gone elsewhere where he was, but he didn't want to move. So he asked Vince to stick around here. Well, as he stuck around, and he was no longer a headliner, his days were gone by, he became strictly a preliminary.
Yeah.
And as a preliminary, he wasn't the same Baron who went in there like in the 60s when he and I used to wrestle. So a lot of people who didn't see him then and saw him years later, they didn't think too much of him.
Right.
But if they'd seen him in the day when we were programming all over, they would have had a different opinion.
Like you mentioned before, overstaying your welcome, working
Absolutely.
maybe too long into your
That's
years.
Right. First of all, me and Parisi were wrestling. Who did you say?
Cicluna and Miller. No,
it wasn't Cicluna and Miller. It was Curtis Iokea and Bill Miller. And Curtis Iokea is a big guy. I don't know if you remember him. He was a 400-pound guy. He was in, every time it's go in the ring sometimes, he was a bit of a trickster and would do different things. I said to Parisi, to Pugliesi's real name, I says, when we go in this tag match and we get him in the ring, don't let him tag on. Let's keep switching on him, and blow him up. I said, teach him a real good lesson. Just keep on him till he, and he was so exhausted that he actually would put his shoulders down to get counted, and I would yank him up. Bill Miller, meanwhile, is standing outside the ring, and he's angry that we don't let the guy tag. He's angry because he felt like that, like, what am I here? Just a statue or, whatever. And somebody in the audience made an audience and say, hey, why didn't you pay like the rest of us to come and see the matches to Bill Miller? And Bill Miller had a temper too. So I had just taken IK and I put an arm bar on him, keep him off the mat. And Bill Miller came in and he gave me a kick that I thought his foot came into my chest and came out of my back. That's how hard he kicked me. He kicked me so hard that I went back and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe. And then slowly I started breathing. Meanwhile, I tagged Pugliese. Mm-hmm. And because I was in that corner, because I couldn't breathe, so Pugliese came in. And after I got okay again, I said to Pugliese, tag. So when he tagged, and Curtis came in with Bill, and Bill came at me. We got into it pretty good, and I wound up hooking him with a front face lock.
Yeah, stop that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Started bleeding, and he kind of passed out.
Were there any repercussions from management when one worker would take a liberty with another worker, like the kick?
Not the, unless, look, when something like that happened, I never would complain about it. And most of the guys would never complain about it. So as far as I know, at least my experience and everything, I don't ever remember. I think that one time Wahoo got into it with the Shadow. Shadow was a pretty tough guy, and actually it was Wahoo who went and tried to complain about it, that he didn't want to wrestle him anymore. And when Vince asked me about it, I said, look, I said, Clyde Steves, I said, there was just a little personal thing that I don't know who's to fault. I said, but nobody should be reprimanded for that, and squashed it. But I don't think that happened that I remember, at least in my experience. Unfortunately, he and I didn't get along too well when he became a promoter. As a wrestler, okay, but as a promoter, because I always felt that when I went to wrestle for him, like for example, one time, I guess it was Miller and I, we packed the place. What arena was that? The Cobo Hall.
Cobo Hall. Yeah.
And I felt that I felt that the pay that they gave me was insulting. It was that bad, and it was really that bad. And I told Vince nicely. I said, Vince, and Vince was friends with him. The guy was friends with a lot of the promoters because he was a promoter himself at this time, even though he was still wrestling. And I said, I just as soon not ever go back there. And Vince says, well, come on, I committed you for a couple, 3 dates or something like that. When I went the second time, I told him, but better make a change then. I'm not going to go there for peanuts. And the change didn't come, and I wouldn't go for the third show. I didn't go, and I never went back there again. And when you want to know what, then he got offended because Dick the Bruiser, between my title reign now, after I dropped the belt, yeah, I teamed with the Bruiser, and in Indiana. And we wrestled through the Midwest, a lot of his tag team partners, including Detroit, opposition to the Sheik.
Okay.
And he called Vince to cry to Vince. And Vince, I guess, told him, he says, well, he's not wrestling for me now. He's not the champion anymore. He's independent. He said, what can I do? The Sicilian Beast.
Okay, a name you don't hear very well. I don't hear very often. Tell me about the Beast.
Well,
barefoot wrestler, right?
Barefoot. He was a very hairy guy, really hairy. He had like a caveman type tights. They were hanging to hair and a big head of hair, But because he wrestled as a beast, it was, in my opinion, it was very difficult to have the kind of match that I would believe that you could take to the Garden and wrestle 2-3 times. I just didn't see that in him because he maintained that beast type guy who was strictly a beast type, and not a wrestler type. And it was very difficult to, for me at least, in my case, to have really a good match with him. So we didn't take that match very far at all. And then he was strictly around Canada. He stayed. And unfortunately, he passed away at a very young age.
Oh. You were leaving for Italy the next morning.
Oh.
So your wife and 5-year-old David are in attendance.
Oh, wow.
True or false, I'm told this is the first time they see you wrestle live.
Right. Yeah, my wife never came to the matches. You know, my son, obviously not either. He was 5 years old.
Right.
Yeah, so they came to the Garden, yeah. I asked my wife, you've never seen me, you won't see me wrestle in Pittsburgh or anyplace else. This is Madison Square Garden, the most famous arena in the world. I think that now that the occasion's here, you know, you should come, because this way you could see, and I wanted her to see just how the fans were with me. You know, because he used to chant my name, Bruno, Bruno, all the time. And I wanted her, as my wife, naturally, I wanted her to experience this thing, and she did.
What did she say?
Oh, for a while she got scared, because she said that she never heard, you know, close to 20,000 people so loud and so powerful. She said, my God, she said, it was thrilling but scary. She says, what these people could do if they didn't like you, you know.
Is David, this young, so impressed by the sport that he wants to do what Dad's doing?
Well, he would say, and we took it in stride, he would say, I want to be like my daddy when I grow up. You know, he would say that, but we let it go, because, you know, he's a 5, 6-year-old kid, you know. Unfortunately, he stayed with that.
Made you have to go back to color commentating in 1985. Now, a very interesting story here. You have your photo taken with the Pope. Pope says, please don't use this for any publicity.
Well, the Pope didn't say anything, but
his
people,
yeah.
You have to go through a lot of channels before you actually get with the Pope. And when it was agreed, because Monsignor Fusco was his name, out of New Kensington, which is outside of Pittsburgh, who was a fan, and then we became very good friends. He was very powerful in Rome. And he has set up this audience with the Pope. Naturally, we couldn't believe it. We were thrilled, and that's why my wife and my son. So we went through all kind of different channels. When you got to Rome, you had to meet with this, you had to meet that. And then I was advised, it says, look, you're a professional wrestler. When you meet with the Pope, there will be photos that we know you'll want to have for memories. But you have to make a promise that these photos cannot be used to enhance your career, for publicity or anything like that. This is very special, very serious. And I gave him my word. I said, my God, I said, I would never do that if you don't want me to. I said, but for me and my family and my kids, as they grow up, to know this, I said, absolutely, you don't have to worry about that. Unfortunately, after that audience with the Pope, Vince saw nothing wrong, because I told him about it. I told him that I couldn't show any photo. But I don't know if he told Ray Morgan or somebody, but Ray Morgan, they didn't mean anything bad by it. They thought it was a great thing. And they said Bruno had a private audience with the Pope. Bruno, his wife and his son. Well, some of the media people said, yeah, here we go in wrestling, you know.
Right.
And they went by it. And in fact, in Pittsburgh, which they always wrote favorable on me, but this one particular time they even knocked and they said, yeah, I'm sure he had a private audience with the Pope, but it's a secret. No, they can't show it. And it was hard for me. But when I retired, I had that photo, boy, and I took it to them. Not to use. I said, this is what you people criticize me because I kept my word.
That's what I was going to say, how frustrating that must have been.
It was.
To not just to prove it to them, say, leave me alone, you know.
Yeah. But the picture was used plenty after I retired, in telling my story and all that kind of stuff.
Your earliest, youngest memories of a Vince McMahon, or it's not a junior, Vincent K. McMahon, is what?
Well, you mean after he got into business as a
just your first time you shook Vincent K.'s hand.
I didn't think too much of anything, just that he was Vince's son, because I didn't have any kind of spending time with.
But was it at this
became,
period, or was it much later when he became involved with the business?
He got involved in wrestling and commentating. I would guess, I'm just guessing, I would say about 1975, right around there.
That.
And so then I got to know him a lot. I had met him, of course, before, but I didn't really know him, you know, because in the summer he used to come and spend with his father,
right.
Him and his brother Rod. They used to come to Washington, be with their dad, because, you know, the mother lived in Carolinas, I believe, yeah, and Vince had remarried, and that's how I knew him like that. But when he became a commentator, then when Tony Rock unfortunately passed away, then I took his place. And then, of course, we worked together a lot, and I thought we worked very well together back then, you know, in 78 to 81, I think it was.
On, the first run of Championship Wrestling, and then, Your famous match against Baba, the 60-minute match in Japan. Did you like spending time in Japan?
In the beginning, because it was so new and so different from anything that I'd ever seen. But like anything else, when you go back and back and back and back, then it, you know, you just want to go do your thing and go home, get out, you know.
Right. The fans, very, very different than U.S. fans in their
Absolutely, back then. I don't know about today, but back then they were polite. Like I'd wrestle Baba. Baba was their hero, and Baba would get a much better reaction. But when they announced me, they gave me a polite, you know, like that. But no boos, you know, back then. They didn't boo you. I thought they were pretty, and they respected you tremendously. My God, I would come out in front of the hotel, they'd recognize you, and as you walked by, they would bow. I thought, wow, look at this. Very unique.
How'd you like the food over there?
Well, in the beginning I didn't, because I didn't like the sushi, you know, the raw fish. And in places we went to, especially in Hokkaido, North Japan, you better like, or you're going to be in trouble. So I didn't like it at all. I had to have a beer before I would touch any of that stuff, but I was so hungry. I was a big guy then, and I had to eat. But as time went on, I got to like it. Now, every now and then, I go to a sushi bar in Pittsburgh, a nice restaurant, Japanese restaurant. They call it the sushi bar, but and they do sushi, and I go there once in a while. I like it. Willie Gilzenberg was behind that one, and but I was not for it. But I didn't protest very strongly. I said, this guy's a baseball player, and I said, he doesn't know nothing about wrestling. It's not like he had a wrestling background. As far as I knew, he had no wrestling background. I said, he really don't belong. I really don't remember, when I was asked about it, I really don't remember the whole thing, what happened at the end, but it didn't happen.
No.
Yeah, but I don't know why.
I was just wondering if it was ever a serious attempt to bring him in, or if this was just something to get some press.
No, there wasn't. I don't think so. They didn't pursue it very long at all.
I had heard that there were some influential people in the New York area who were opposing to the black hand thing that the Sicilians would do at the time.
No, this was in Chicago.
I was in Chicago.
They got
and they were advised that they should stop.
They were advised very strongly, saying, if you don't knock that off, you're going to get more or less a visit from somebody. So we recommend that you drop that, and immediately. And they dropped it. A lot of people didn't like Roy Shires, but I thought, as a wrestler who became a promoter, I thought he was darn good to his boys. Now, you know, he paid well. He was one of the better payoff guys. But a lot of guys may have not liked him, because Roy Shires was very strict, very tough about the kind of wrestling that he wanted, and the way the guys got to be, what kind of shape, and what he expected of them in the ring. And if it didn't get that, he would be like a madman in a dressing room. and which was good. I respected him for that, because the guys that went there, they gave their very best that they had to offer. And so like I say, a lot of guys didn't like him. I respected him for that sense. He was a good payoff guy. He really took care of his the wrestlers that came in. I don't know if too many wrestlers have ever complained about him not being generous with the payoffs, but he was a promoter, and this was his business, and he was very demanding, and I think he had every right in the world to be that way. When I went to Australia the first time in 1966, I met Dominic. And here we find out that he comes from a town called Frosolone. I come from a town called Pizzaferrato in Abruzzi, Italy. And these towns were with maybe 15 minutes apart. Of course, I never left my town. You know, we didn't have cars or anything like that. So I never went anywhere outside of my town, except when I came to America, where we went to Naples. The next morning, we got on a ship to come here. So I didn't know anything about over there. When I went to Australia, I got introduced to Dominic DeNucci, who was a big star in Australia. And we find out that we were practically neighbors in the old country. And so we would work out together in the morning, we'd go to the restaurant together, and we became good friends then. And that friendship has remained to this day. We're still very close friends today.
Very nice.
It was impressive, but for me, I like the old garden, just like the old Boston garden, because how different they were. This new garden is a beautiful place and all that, but it spreads out like this, if you know what I mean. The old Madison Square Garden was like the Roman Colosseum, was straight,
taller,
taller,
yeah,
up like this, but closer like. You weren't as distant to the rink, to the matches, as the new garden. You know, one time I went in the new garden. Now it's an old garden, but I went all the way in the back when I came in from out of town someplace, and I went straight to the garden. And I was early, so I took a walk way up there, and I'm looking at, from way up on top, and I'm looking at that ring, and there were guys still working in the ring, like putting it up and all. And I thought to myself, my God, how can people up here possibly see so well and enjoy it?
Right.
To me, you know, whereas in the old garden, just like Boston Garden, it had a different look like this. It seemed like closer to everything.
You look down more,
yeah,
as opposed to
away and down. You know?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's the part about Gotch. I knew Gotch trained him, but I don't know
that he was behind
that he was behind any of that. I like to think not. I don't know. What I think happened there is, this was at the time, which, you know, you went to Japan. I didn't know what was going on with these people. I didn't know that Inaki was breaking off that organization, which was Baba's involved in it too, and he was forming his own.
Right.
And because I was one of the stars for Baba, they pulled this sort of double cross on me, because they figured if they destroyed me somehow by beating me, make me submit, and they had the cameras and all that stuff, that they would always use that to take steam out of my coming to Japan and wrestling Baba. So whether Gotch, that's honestly, I never heard that,
okay,
but he did. You know, I'm wrestling him and everything, and he puts on the submission hold on me. And I caught on, because he's really put on the juice, as we say. And when I caught on what was going on at that time, I'm not bragging, but I was a very strong guy, and I was pretty powerful, and I was able to break my way through it. And then I really got to him. I did a pretty good number on him, and he managed to reach out to Baba. And then that's right, it's true. Not only would he never come back in the ring, but I never, you know, had anything to do with him after that ever.
And you didn't work for him again. Was it more out of your allegiance to Baba, or because of that, or both?
Yeah, that was a touchy thing for Vince Sr., because later,
right,
when Baba took over, I kept allegiance with Baba. I respected Baba. Baba was a very, very honorable man. He really was. And what happened was that now Vince started doing business with Inaki, sending him talent, you know. And they had a good deal, I'm sure, going. But not look bad for Vince, because here I am going for the Baba organization, and he is booking for the Inaki organization. Right. And some of the Japanese promoters came here and they had a meeting with Vince, and they said, you know, they said, Bruno going for Baba, it hurts us. It's not good for us. He wrestles for you. He says, you got to, you know, like stomp him. And so Vince had a meeting with me, and it was a good meeting. I mean, it was no holler and screaming or anything like that. But I explained to Vince, I said, Vince, I said, you gotta remember that I was wrestling for Baba way before you start booking for Inoki. You also know that I don't like Inoki. That's known. I said, I cannot be that kind of a guy who's gonna quit Baba to go for whom I respect tremendously, to go for a guy that I don't care for at all. I said, I just can't do it, Vince. I'm sorry, but I won't do it. And you know, in all honesty, he didn't give me too much of a hassle with that, because he didn't like it, I'm sure, but it was what it was.
Was it unwise for him to continue to pay big houses like that until he got TV back?
I felt that it was very unwise, and in fact, I was the guy who was criticized by some of the outsiders. They're saying, see, he don't draw anymore.
Well, there was no TV.
We had no TV at all. And so when we first lost the TV and we ran the first show, which we had some TV coverage just before we lost it, we did great. Then the next show we had no TV. There had been nothing on TV. The house had dropped in half. Right. And I said to Vince, we had a little meeting, I said, Vince, it dropped in half. The next show, it's going to drop another half from that half. I said, we're going to come down to, he said, Bruno, he said, I have to keep my word. Vince felt he needed to keep his word with Madison Square Garden. He had a contract with them to run X amount of shows and so forth. And he said, I can't break my word with the Garden. I said, but Vince, if you explain to the Garden that we lost the TV, and without the TV to advertise, to introduce the opponents and all that kind of stuff, it won't work. I says, the Garden is a pretty powerful organization, I imagine. I didn't know any of the chiefs in the Garden. I says, maybe they can help you to get some TV. So eventually they had that meeting, and they shut the Garden down just for a very brief time. We got on Channel 47, a UHF station at the time. Now that was a Mickey Mouse station. Yet after being on there for 1 month, I came back with Ramos or whoever, and we sold the place out, the New Garden. So a lot of people were critical of me, saying that I wasn't drawing anymore. But you know, again, you always have critics. But the facts are the facts. We lost the TV, and we survived that. The guys have followed me with the titles. They never had this problem. We had, besides losing the TV, we had another problem. Einhorn came in opposition to us in New York. Eddie Einhorn, and he brought in all kinds of great talent. And Vince was very concerned about all that. And I kept talking to him. I was talking to Vince every day. I said, Vince, I wouldn't worry about it. I said, we're going to drive these people out. And we did. I just remember hearing about it, but I didn't know any details or whatever. I don't know if Jerry had just flipped out because of the loss of his mother, whom everybody loves, or whether he was messed up because Jerry had problems. You know, he was a very heavy drinker, and he was always intoxicated that way. I'm not suggesting that that's what happened that night. I have no idea, but I did hear that that's what happened. But I know when my mother died, I know I fell apart. I went to pieces. So people react differently with such tragedies, you know. So I don't know the circumstances of that night, but I did hear that story.
Do you fear that the crowds are going to tear the damn place apart every time you lose?
I lost a number of times. You either get counted out or...
Yeah, but this is a violent... Yeah. Their hero is bleeding like a stuck pig.
Yeah. Yeah, the crowd, that's when they always had to bring extra security for the guy, for my opponent, because the people used to really, you know, take it, they wanted to get to the guy.
Gary Hart, the manager, said that the original plan was to bring him in with Koloff as his manager, but that you nixed it because you heard badly, that Gary had spoken badly?
Absolute lie.
Okay.
Absolute lie. I never heard anything about him managing Koloff or anybody that I knew of. Nobody ever said that to me, and I never heard that before.
In his book, he said that Pete Sanchez had told you that Gary Hart had bad
Absolutely not true. Absolutely
more
not
myths.
true.
We could put that on the same shelf as the Buddy Rogers heart attack, I guess, right? And some other items.
Isn't it amazing if Buddy Rogers loses a title? Then, as you said, he went to Detroit and started wrestling for the Sheik when the Sheik was only used to the preliminary. He quit there, and then when he patched up with Vince, he put him in a tag match.
And he was tagging against you right after shortly after the heart attack, which was impressive. Bruno, thank you so much for the trip down memory lane. I think it's important from a historical standpoint to have people like you tell us these stories firsthand, and I'm sure the fans appreciate it as well.
Well, thank you, Sean. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the whole interview, and you're a guy who's well informed. You impressed the heck out of me. I didn't know. You told me stuff that I had forgotten.
we do our research here, and
wonderful.
so thank you very much, and
job.
continued success and good luck.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching.